At first light, the fields look harmless, grass beaded with dew, a sky rinsed clean by night, but the line begins to move and the illusion dies. Boots push furrows into soft earth, canteens knock against ribs, the brass gleams like misplaced sunlight. You shoulder in with the rest, shoulder to shoulder, until you can feel the heat of another man's breath tapping your ear. The sergeant's voice is a cord pulling you forward. Somewhere downrange, the enemy is only a rumor and a ripple of smoke. Then the rifles speak and rumors become metal. The first bullets don't sound like bullets. They sound like hail on a tin roof, like peas flung at a window, like corn pitched against a barn. Small, homely sounds dragged into murder. A man to your left twists hard at the waist, as if someone has called his name. Another, just taller than you, sits down carefully in the rank wheat and forgets to get up again. The neat rectangles you saw in oil paintings, the tidy rows and dashing charges, vanish beneath a wind of lead that doesn't care for choreography. You study the instrument that does the work, the conical minier that blooms when it bites, and you learn its grammar. The way it kisses cloth first, the way it chews bone to glittering gravel, the way it tucks scraps of coat deep into meat so that even the best surgeon can't tell where man ends and garment begins. On some acres, the ground drinks so much iron and flesh that no seed ever trusts it again. You feel the air flex and slap as volleys pass, and when the line halts and drops, you discover the democracy of fear, how even the sturdiest hands begin to shake when they must pour powder into a small dark mouth while death combs the grass for names. You think the hospital will be a reprieve until you see it. Doorless barns humming with flies, a sweet metal smell that crawls up the nose and sits behind the eyes, a floor slicked by the rain of what men lose when they are opened. The surgeon's coat is no longer one color, his saw no longer an instrument but a metronome. He moves from cot to crate to blanket on the dirt, talking to himself, to God, to the knife. He cannot clean the blade between lives. There are too many lives. If you are lucky, they find a brown bottle and a rag, and a brief, fogged kingdom opens under your nose. If you are not, the orderly simply takes your wrist and says, "Look at me," until you bite through the piece of wood he presses between your teeth. Limbs pile like firewood at the tent flap. Someone makes a joke about needing a longer wagon. No one laughs. Outside, a wagon waits anyway. Close work is worse. Smoke sours the thicket, and in the wilderness you can put out your hand and touch a man you cannot see. Bayonets find ribs when words fail. You learn the way knuckles split on teeth, the ugliness of a rifle swung like a club. Somewhere in the tangle, a boy is praying in 3 languages and none of them help. Later, in a lull, you discover there are things a man can live through and still not live with. A friend searching the ground for his fingers, the churned patch where somebody tried to crawl in a circle to get away from their own blood. At night, you dream in fragments, buttons, boot heels, the slow folding of a tall man's body, the way blood goes black when it meets shade, and you wake because another dream is scratching. It takes a moment to realize it is only the lice at their work. The Second Army, quieter, tireless, indifferent, makes camp in every regiment. Cholera that knocks without knocking. Typhoid that starts as a heat in the forehead and ends as a drowning in the chest. The flux that hollows men to paper. In the tents, the orderlies name diseases like weather, and weather moves through a camp faster than any cavalry. A creek becomes a mirror that will not forgive. Horses rot where they fell and send a stink downstream, and the men downstream drink because there is nothing else. Someone says you can smell an army before you see it. Someone else says you can count the dead by how fast the flies learn your name. Nurses knot scarves over noses and keep moving. A girl with steady hands daubs a brow and murmurs something about home as if the word itself were a poultice. Sometimes it is. When the stomach fails, the heart soon follows. You learn the shape and weight of hardtack, its useless corners, the sea inside it where weevils swim. You knock the biscuit on the heel of your boot and listen for the small dry rain that means it is alive. If there is coffee, and there is not always, you baptize the brick, skim off what wriggles, and tell yourself the extra meat will do you good. Salt pork arrives the color of bruises. Men take knives to it like geology students, shaving at strata until something edible emerges. Often nothing does. The joke is that rancid pork burns well enough to be fuel. Men hold their hands to the blue fat fire and pretend the smell is a kitchen and not a ruin. Far away, a general draws a finger across a map and the world under that finger goes empty. Rails are heated and bent into bright bows around trees. Smoke learns to write its name on the sky. A mother in a city discovers flour costs a fortune printed on paper that is already dying, and she brews coffee from beans that never saw a vine, acorns, chicory, corn scorched to bitterness. There is a day when women take to the streets, and a president throws his pockets to the crowd and promises bread, and when the coins stop ringing on cobblestone, the hunger keeps speaking in the same voice. Prison is war without the crack of musket, a slow arithmetic that always arrives at the same sum. You enter through a gate, and the gate sighs closed, and the air itself becomes thinner. The stockade is a field penned with tall timber, and the sky is too wide for mercy. There is a ribbon of water crossing the ground like a blue promise until you kneel, and discover the promise is a lie, latrine and lifeline braided into one foul stream. Men drink because a body must. Mendy because a body must. The guards have a line strung in the dirt. Step over, and they teach you about distance with powder and lead. After the first week, no one calls it a deadline. It has another name, the wish line, the mercy line, the quick way out. Every morning, the living have to step around the dead to start the day. It is not callousness. There is simply no other room. Inside the fence, another country forms with its own law. Wolves in rags discover how to live by taking. They call themselves raiders and wear trophies carved from spoons, from bone, from the last small shine a man owns. They hunt among the dying because scavengers live longer than saints. One afternoon, a jury rises up out of the same filth and makes a gallows out of pine and rope, and for an hour, justice remembers its old face. The crowd roars like a river too long dammed. For a night, the air tastes cleaner, and in the morning, the belly is empty again. North and south, the cold is another jailer. Lake wind slices canvas, and gray water skins over in the barrels until somebody draws a breath and decides to break ice barehanded, because thirst is louder than pain. The guards find games to pass the hours. A loaf held just out of reach. A laugh when desperate hands swarm like minnows. A man trussed to a post to meet the weather. A barrel with sharp staves used as a saddle that flays the rider inch by inch. Punishment multiplies when hope does. Someone runs for the wall and the camp becomes a throat clearing, and then a rifle coughs. 2, 3, and the run is over. Someone digs out under the fence with a spoon until his fingernails are gone and the tunnel floods back with the night. If a man does win free, the hounds know the grammar of his fear. Their bays discover him in the dark and turn his running into a small experiment in futility. Sometimes the swamp decides first. Between armies and the law, there is another landscape where the hunted move, men running from chains and men running from flags. They wear different histories but the same breath. The North Star becomes a thin silver promise scratched on the dome of the night. Swamps hold them like a mother with a fever, close, sweating, dangerous. The water is a mirror that eats faces. Cypress kneels and rises. Mosquitoes wet their mouths on the softest parts of the body, and clouds of them turn a man into a map of bites. If you are lucky, a quilt hangs from a porch rail in a certain pattern, a lamp shines in a certain window, and the door opens to a pantry where bread still remembers wheat. You swallow fast so gratitude doesn't slow your feet. If you are not lucky, the dogs find you first, and the men who own the dogs teach you what they think about freedom with iron and fire. There is a place that keeps a ledger of souls like a bank, balanced with whips. Deserters choose their wilderness among stones and shadow. They learn the taste of roots, the limp cold muscle of a snake eaten raw, the way the mind folds in on itself until every snapped twig is a patrol. Some go underground, caves stitched together by rumor and smoke, where men learn to see in the dark, and the dark learns their names in return. When they are caught, punishment prefers spectacle. A hillside. A company drawn up smart. A chaplain with a voice like winter water. 9 men drawing lots while the 10th tries not to look like anybody's son. The volley cracks. In some places, the bodies hang for days because somebody in authority thinks fear needs rehearsal. The living stare hard and swear oaths nobody can keep. A letter answers another letter. A wife writes of children growing like weeds and bread, shrinking like a moon in reverse. A husband writes of nights when the dead come back as orderly as a parade and then break ranks to whisper. A mother sews a square of paper to the inside of a jacket, name, town, the old road that passes the church and the mill, so that if the worst happens, the worst may be carried home in some small way. In a field that will someday be a farmer's again, a stranger pins a note to a boy's coat and then covers his face with his hat because the boy looks so much like someone, and he cannot decide who. The war learns to speak in numbers that do not fit in a mouth. For every shot that finds blood, sickness finds two. For every man torn by iron, hunger hollows three. In cities, money loses faith in itself and turns paper thin. Butter costs laughter and laughs are scarce. Riots make a sound like the ocean finally remembering it is bigger than the boats upon it. In the country, smoke draws a black sentence across a horizon of corn. And behind the sentence is a fact. The long walk home will cross stubble fields where granaries used to stand, through towns that smell like chimneys. A crow flying this route must carry its own ration. Afterwards, the bill arrives. It is printed on skin and bone. It shows up in a man's gait, shortened by wood that claims the space where a leg used to be, in a throat that tears itself awake at small noises, in silence across a kitchen table that no joke can fix. It appears as a fainting spell in a mother who opens the door to a shadow of her boy. It appears in the hands of a nurse who learned to hold the dying and cannot stop wanting to hold everyone. It appears in cedar boxes under courthouses where some clerk has tried to make rows and columns out of what cannot be counted. Years later, the fences fall and the earth reclaims the posts, but the ground never quite forgets. In summer, when the air sits heavy, there's a smell that rises in certain places, the old tang of iron and sweat and what iron makes of a man. Children playing on the ridge find a button like the moon at their feet, and somebody's grandfather names the regiment by touch. The swamp keeps its secrets until a drought lowers the water and a ring of fence posts blushes up out of the muck like ribs. In the city museum, a length of rail shaped into a bow leans in a glass case, a smile made of sorrow. Sometimes you stand on a quiet road where crosses once lined the ditches from city to sea, and you listen, and at first you hear nothing at all. But then a wagon wheel far away squeals like an animal. A kite on the edge of the sky tilts and tilts again, patient as time. A crow climbs a thermal with no need for maps. Somewhere nearby, a creek sings the tune water always sings, forgetting and remembering, and you realize you have been walking for an hour without speaking. Because there are places where your voice does not belong. If you were lucky, you lived through it. If you lived through it, you carried it. Some days you could carry it like a folded handkerchief, hidden and light. Some days it sat on your chest like a sleeping ox. There were men who found prayer in a sawdust-floored church, and men who found it at the bottom of a glass. Men who learned to plant again in soil that had drunk too much. And men who never went near a field if the wind was wrong, because the wind could turn pages you were not ready to read. There were women who stitched names into quilts until the names made a winter of their own. And women who sang to babies named for men the babies would never meet. And if, late, you hear dogs in the distance where no farm keeps hounds, if you wake smelling smoke no chimney owns, if a hard summer rain knocks on the roof and you mistake it for hail on tin and count your friends without meaning to, well, the old war has its habits. It knows the road to your door. It sits on the stoop with its hat in both hands and waits like kin. You let it in when you must, and you feed it the smallest portion. And when it nods, you lead it kindly to the porch again. Because morning is coming and you must walk a field or mend a fence, or teach a child that bread is more than flour and water. It is a promise a world makes to itself, to live, to rise, to be broken and shared, and to live again.